Although, as we've just seen, Wilder rearranged the sequence of historic events in Little House on the Prairie, she was concerned about the historical accuracy of the book. In 1933, she and Lane took a road trip together into Kansas and Oklahoma, looking for the site of the Ingalls family's Little House on the Prairie. But Wilder had remembered distances wrong. She thought the house was 40 miles from Independence, not just 13 miles away. And census records from 1870 weren't available to her then. Wilder also tried to find information on an Indian chief whose name she couldn't remember from those years in Indian Territory. She began her search for him in Oklahoma, where the Osage were then living, by contacting a source she believed to be an authority on Osage history. "I thought perhaps you could tell me the name of an Indian chief that I have forgotten," she wrote. She further specified the date she was interested in, 1870 to 1871. He wrote back, suggesting the name Le Soldat de Chine. The man was very friendly to the white people, he told Wilder. Wilder then contacted the Kansas Historical Society for more information. The news she received from them was very disappointing. "I have been unable to find a reference to your story of the Indian chief who was friendly to the white settlers." Indeed, there is no historical record of this figure for this particular period of history, and several critics have attacked Wilder for creating this character. In her defense, however, Wilder was writing historical fiction, and her decision to create a character that plays a key role in the novel is consistent with the creative license inherent in this genre. Wilder checked two legitimate historical sources, then made her own creative interpretations of the past. What about the other characters in the novel? The Scotts and Mr. Edwards. In Pioneer Girl, Wilder identified their closest neighbors as the Robertsons, but census records from Montgomery County reveal no one by that name or by Scott. The Ingalls' nearest neighbors were named Johnson, Gilmore, and Longer or Lunker. The census taker's handwriting isn't clear. As for Mr. Edwards, that wildcat from Tennessee, he is probably an entirely fictional character, although in Pioneer Girl, Wilder identified a man as Mr. Brown, as the one who brought Christmas presents back for herself and Mary on that very stormy Christmas Eve in Indian Territory. The Montgomery County, Kansas Federal Census of 1870 does not include a listing for anyone named Brown or Edwards, nor does it include a listing for a bachelor farmer from Tennessee. It does, however, reveal that a 25-year-old bachelor farmer did live close to the Ingalls cabin, Ed Mason, an Englishman. Ed? Mr. Edwards? Who can say? But one character in Little House on the Prairie is traceable, Wilder's Dr. Tan. Dr. George Tan was an African-American homeopathic doctor who settled on the Osage Diminished Reserve in 1869. Listed as a physician on the 1870 Montgomery County Federal Census, he lived about 1 mile from the Ingalls cabin. He and Charles Ingalls were the same age. According to Pioneer Girl, he was the attending physician when Carrie was born on August 3, 1870, assisted by Mrs. Robertson. He lived out his life in that part of Kansas, working as a doctor until his death in 1909. One final historical note. Was the Ingalls family forced to leave Indian Territory in 1871? Is there a historical basis for what happens at the end of Little House on the Prairie? As we've already discussed, Wilder provides just one brief but tantalizing explanation for what drew Pa into Indian Territory in the first place. If some blasted politicians in Washington hadn't sent out word it would be all right to settle here, I'd never have been 3 miles over the line into Indian Territory. In reality, the family had settled 14 miles west of the reserve's eastern boundary and 6 miles north of its southern one. And officially, politicians in Washington hadn't encouraged settlement of the Osage Diminished Reserve. But the Kansas governor had. Kansas cannot afford to remain idle while other states are using every honorable means in their power to encourage immigrants to settle within their borders. The immigration for 1867 was 50,000, and it should have been 100,000. Pioneer Girl is equally vague about what drew Charles Ingalls to Indian Territory. But like Little House on the Prairie, Wilder's memoir clearly states that the federal government was responsible for escorting settlers out. In the fall of 1870, federal troops were indeed ordered to remove white intruders who had settled on Cherokee land, soon to be Osage land, from Indian Territory in what is now Oklahoma. There were not any orders to remove white settlers from Osage land in Kansas. But according to researcher Penny Linsenmeyer, one newspaper in southern Kansas misunderstood this order and published a story reporting that federal troops intended to remove white families from Osage land. She also points to an official notice distributed throughout Montgomery County, Kansas by Indian agent Isaac Gibson, which announced the federal government's intention to remove all settlers and intruders in Indian Territory. Although the notice applied to white settlers living in what is now Oklahoma, the term Indian Territory was used to describe Osage lands in Kansas as well. And finally, in October 1870, the War Department in Washington granted the Army authority to force intruders from the alleged boundaries of the Osage Indian Reserve or other reservations in southeastern Kansas. These kinds of official statements could have created misunderstanding and confusion among settlers like Charles Ingalls. Yet by the fall of 1870, Charles Ingalls would have also known that he could have purchased land he and his family were living on. The Osage Nation had agreed to sell the land back to the federal government. Complicating this plan, however, was the railroad's claim to the land. In the fall of 1870, this complication hadn't yet been resolved. If the federal government bought Osage land directly, settlers would pay $1.25 an acre for the land. If the railroad's claim was honored, settlers would pay considerably more. So, were the Ingalls really forced to leave the little house on the prairie, or did they leave because they feared they couldn't afford the land if the railroad's claims were honored? It's impossible to know for sure, but Pioneer Girl reveals that the real Ingalls family left Indian Territory with their neighbors, which seems to imply a perception among many of them that they were indeed leaving before they were going to be forced out. Then we all got in the wagon, and with Jack running under it, we drove away, leaving our little house standing empty and lonely on the prairie. The soldiers were taking all the white people off the Indians' land. All the neighbors went with us for a while, then they scattered. But Pioneer Girl also hints at yet another reason why the family left and journeyed back to the big woods of Wisconsin, not west to Minnesota and Plum Creek, as the fictional family does. We came at last to the place we had left when we went west. The land was Pa's again because the man who bought it from him had not paid for it. So, as we've already discussed, the family returned to the big woods of Wisconsin, where Wilder formed the memories that became the basis for Little House in the Big Woods. But before we end this discussion, we should return to the observation that Charles Ingalls was an illegal squatter on Osage lands, and the implication that Wilder's depiction of the Osage people were at best culturally insensitive, and at worst, historically inaccurate and misleading, that Wilder whitewashed the truth.